He shares joy and the daily forecast every night on TV. Reece talks about the weather and so much more. What do you do when God calls you to do something that makes no sense? Gideon's story in the Bible has some insight. And Russell Cook was looking for purpose, so he did something no man has ever done before, and it's running him into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up on episode 116 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, it's Reece, who is a meteorologist for Channel 5 Eyewitness News in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Thanks for coming on the show, and I love to start every conversation with every guy I talk to with the big question, what do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
Yeah, Andy, I think my answer is a little complex, but it is simple in the grand scheme of things. But I would say, at least for men and kind of that millennial to Gen Z age, just starting to get towards adulthood, I think the biggest challenge that we face is kind of the American dream, but from the Christian standpoint. And what I mean by that, I get on social media every day. And every day I see something that says, if you're married and your spouse works, you failed as a husband. If you have kids and your kids go to daycare, you failed as a parent. If your kids are not homeschooled, you're failing as a parent as well. And so what happens is a lot of my friends, my peers, what I've noticed they're doing is they are nervous about, how do I make this income up? What do I have to do? All right, I've got to do this side job and this side job, and I've got to do this. And it ends up taking them away from time with their family. And so what I often say is we're so focused chasing the American dream and the good life that we forget God's life. And we are so focused on what is it that we can do to gain the approval of other men that we forget, all right, what has the creator of men called me to do? And so I think the way we overcome that is leaning into the life that God has provided for us. And for each individual, that's going to look different.
I love that, Chris. I struggle with that myself. And I just had a talk with my wife just last night about, she said, I appreciate you're a hard worker, but at some point you have to say enough is enough. And, at some point, Chris, we have to say, God, I've done everything I can. And I have to trust, if you say in the Bible that you will provide our needs, like I have to trust that. At some point, there's only so many hours in the day. We have to figure out what that looks like. And I know that's a great word. There's just, I don't know, hustle culture, would you call it?
Yeah, that's the word I was thinking of. I was like, it's hustle culture, but I think there's a secular version of that and a Christ follower version of that. And what I have sometimes found is that the Christ follower version of that is almost more intense and more condemning. And I'm like, hold on, I think we try to please other Christians. Let's please God.
I love that. I love that. I love to start with this conversation with just talking about your story. So let's go back to, I don't know, was it little Chris that had the dream of, I want to become a TV weather person someday?
Yes, Andy, I was 6 years old. I was growing up in Houston at the time, and there was a tropical storm named Allison. It was making landfall, lots of rain, lots of wind. The bigger impact was a lot of flooding that the Houston area had. Me being a kid, I just wanted to go outside and play in the rain. And so I kept saying, I want to go outside and play in the rain. And with it being a tropical storm, my mom, for obvious reasons, said, absolutely not. Of course not. But what we did was we watched the news. And they had the weather folks out. The meteorologists were in the storm talking about what was happening, how Houston was being impacted. And I asked a fatal question, if you will. But I said, Mom, why do they get to go out and not me? And my mom made the mistake of saying, well, that's their job. That's what they're paid to do. And I said, well, I want that job. So that was the start. And then I moved to Kentucky in middle school, and we just had a crippling ice storm and snowstorm. I was out of school for 2 weeks with that one. And from there, I was like, you know what, whatever with hurricanes, I think winter is much, much cooler. And from then, even at a young age, I said, Minnesota is the place where I want to be. I want to go to a place where you get winter in a big way every year.
I wanted to be a meteorologist too when I was growing up. I remember I actually grew up here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and Paul Douglas, who was a guy on KARE 11, for whatever reason, I really liked him. And so I thought I want to be like him someday. And it's so funny how somebody will just say one little thing and it'll get implanted in your mind of, okay, well then I can't do it. So I think it was fifth grade science. It was the weather section of science. It was the weather unit. And I don't know, I got like a C plus on the final test of the weather. But it wasn't even my parents. It was a family friend who was watching me at the time. He heard that I got a C plus and he goes, well, I guess you can't be a weatherman now. And
Oh no. No, weather is very difficult. I will say that. I remember in my college experience, there was a friend of mine actually who was pre-med, and he thought pre-med was too hard. And so he was like, you know what? Let me go into just engineering. And then he thought engineering was too hard. And he said, let me do meteorology. And then after meteorology, he went back to pre-med. He was like, pre-med was way easier than meteorology. So it is a very difficult major. I don't think people realize how hard and how challenging it is. I think my freshman class started when maybe 50 or 60, and there were 5 of us who graduated. It is a very tough major.
so but you held on to the dream. So what was the time? Was there a time where you said, God, I don't think I can do it anymore? And how did he help you get through it to keep going?
There was a time where I questioned, God, is doing the weather your path for me? And so one of a nickname that I have among a lot of my friends is Rev. But my parents have called me that for a while as well. And even in my family, my mom to this day, she says all the time, I think you're going to be a pastor one day, whether now or later. She's like, I just think that. And I was right there, senior year of high school, and I reached this point, and I said, as a high schooler, I got to be a leader for our middle school students, and I loved it. And I was like, there's something about connecting with students that I really like. And then just a lot of my friends all kind of came to me for spiritual counsel. And I was like, I really like this life of my friends are like, hey, I've got questions, or I'm struggling with this. Can I go to you? What does the Bible say? What do we do with this? And so on top of that, my senior year of high school, I got to student teach one of my classes. And so I was like, do I want to be a weatherman? Do I want to be a teacher? Do I want to be a youth pastor? And then the fourth one was, do I want to be a worship leader? And I leaned the worship leader route, and I was almost like, you know what? I think I might just go to college to do worship, and find a church and get plugged in. But I don't want to give up the weather part. That was my big hang up. And then finally, it was my dad who said, son, you can be a meteorologist and still talk to schools. You can be a meteorologist and still be a youth group leader and get that. You can be a meteorologist and still lead worship with your church. And he said, I think it's one route that you have where you get to do all the things you want to do. You don't have to get paid to do something just because that's what you love. You can still do it. With that, I said, okay, I'm running with it. Maybe that's the one thing he said, but it kept me going. And college was difficult. But at the end of the day, what got me through college was just this thought of there were people who said I wouldn't be a meteorologist, and I had to prove them wrong.
I love it. So you proved them wrong. And now how long have you been doing it?
I've been a meteorologist going on 9 years now.
I had a chance you toured the studio here at KTIS where I work. And I think I was talking to one of the people that you work with, and she was just saying that, especially with this spring weather, and it's crazy, right? Especially in Minnesota, and it's been a crazier than usual spring. I don't know. It feels like it at least. And I know that meteorologists, and she was just saying you were getting a lot of flack from people online. How do you deal with that? Where people, I don't know, do you feel like they're just trying to take out their anger on the weather outside on you? Or how do you handle people that want you to be 100% accurate, but God and how he works weather, it's never 100% accurate?
Weather can't be 100% accurate. On the days where it is, it feels good. It always, if you forecast 60 and the high is 59, like typically everyone's like, all right, that was a good forecast. That's, that's how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. When you forecast 60 and it's 60, or you say the snow is going to start at 1:30 and the snow starts right at 1:30, those are those days where it's like, oh, that was a small win. Typically, if you say the snow is going to start at 1:30, give or take 15 minutes, like that. That's just how it goes. But in terms of the hateful emails, because I get them. And I want to say I'm fortunate in the sense that I think I get, a little bit more in the way of positive emails. But a couple of weeks ago, it was just an onslaught of hateful emails, hateful comments, it didn't matter where I turned. In fact, I said, you know what? I'm going off of social media for a bit because this is so overwhelming. And in that case, it was nothing I had done, but something revolving a former coworker, but it was just an onslaught of hate directed toward me that was truly misguided, but people didn't know what the truth was or where the truth lied. And so they pushed it toward me. For a moment there, I just said, you've got to shut down the emotions because I'm a big feeler. And I was like, you've got to shut it down. And then I found myself not feeling like myself.
Mm.
I'd grab lunch with a friend. And again, I'm a big feeler. When I grab lunches with friends, like that's a big deal for me. I love the connection. And I found myself afterwards, I was like, why do I feel empty? I just spent 2 hours having lunch with one of my closest friends. Something is not right. And that's when I realized you cannot turn off your ability to feel. And so I prayed about it. And I just kind of prayed. I said, God, you have to help me remember the truth of who I am. You've put me here. I know you're not going to give me more than I can't handle. But I also said, at the same time, God, please help me to be reminded of the positives so that it's not all negatives coming my way. And it's as if he heard my prayer. That day, I got a card from someone. And they didn't leave a return address or anything, but it was the kindest card. I keep it in my car so I could see it every day. But it was like, I've been meaning to write you this for years. And they said, but I watch the way you carry yourself, the way you dress. I smile every single day when I watch you do the weather. And you've also inspired me to start dressing better. And so they were like, I start dressing up more. And it's all because I watch you every day. And I've done it for a couple of years. And I just want to say thank you. And that card was such a pivotal moment. And I was like, this is what it's about. You're giving people the weather. You're here to protect lives and property. But for me, I want them to see joy or find some sort of positivity. One of the positives I often get is, oh, you could tell me a tornado is coming, but you somehow still make me smile in the process, And I was like, well, it's about being joyful. We cannot control the weather, but we can control our response to it. In Minnesota, where winters are long, I often say, all right, well, you can choose to find joy in the winter, or you can have the same amount of winter and less joy.
Well, and I know that was because you moved up here. I know you came from Wisconsin, so you were used to it. But I mean, again, being from Houston, I know a lot of people, when you came up here, I know that a lot of people said, well, you said you're excited and you want Minnesota winters. And I think people said, are you sure you really want Minnesota winter? It's
I get a lot of that question. Yes.
Do you still want Minnesota winters?
More than ever. That's the problem. So it's like with each passing year, I find myself liking winter more and more. And, here we are in March recording this, but I laughed because I was talking to a friend the other day and I was like, I know we just got a blizzard last week, but I'm already looking forward to the upcoming winter and hoping that it's a better, snowier year than what we got this year. And they're like, you really do live for the snow, don't you? I was like, it is why I'm here.
I love it. So do you see the big snow? So what do you do when, first off, you must be excited when you actually forecast the snow and it's coming down and you see it. How do you celebrate the big snowfall? Do you have anything that you do?
Oh, that's a good question for my wife, Andy, because she always cracks up. I pace back and forth and I don't sleep. And so it's so funny. I do not sleep when we have a snowstorm. And I think part of that is just excitement. I think the other part of that is wanting to make sure that my forecast is right and wanting to get the details and, see how it plays out. Mm-hmm. But, just within the last week, we had a snowstorm on a Tuesday. It really kind of came into the picture the Friday before that storm. And that Friday night, my younger brother was in town. I was like, oh, we're looking at a snowstorm. This is looking really good. I think I slept that Friday night. Saturday night, no, I did not. I was like, it's getting closer. And then I led worship at church that Sunday. So the alarm went off at 5 a.m., So I was like, there was no sleep that night. Sunday night into Monday, I really didn't sleep because I was like, all right, we're going to wake up in the morning. There's going to be winter storm and blizzard warnings. And I knew it was coming and I was eager. And what went through my head that night was, okay, how am I going to plan the weathercast? What do I want to talk about? How do I want to open this up? What's the most important information? I'm always thinking of this. So then Tuesday morning, oh no, there was no way I was going to sleep Monday night into Tuesday morning. I was like, today is the day. Our storm is coming in. I woke up amped. But when it snows, my wife will tell you that I will often look out every window in our home. I will pace back and forth from the back door to the front door. I'll go upstairs and get a view. I'll go, all around, out the garage, open it, step into the driveway. And I've done this since I was a kid. I always have. And I said, I can't just take in the snow from one angle. Every single angle is pretty in a different way. And I just keep looking. Unlike most Minnesotans, I do find joy in clearing the snow, particularly with the snowblower. And so when the snow is is done, I like to get out and get in it. And I think there's beauty. I almost find beauty in the sound of snowblowers running simultaneously
Mm.
uh, when everyone's clearing their snow. So like I said, it's always unique, but I think my celebration, if you will, is just saying, let's enjoy this. Let's step outside. Let's enjoy what's happening. I haven't this winter. I think I've forgotten about it because I've been so focused on trying to get a snowstorm. But one of the things I love to do, especially when it snows during the day and it's particularly heavy, I like to go for a walk and just enjoy kind of the muffled, quiet sound that we have.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The silence, it just all of a sudden, I know there's actually an acoustics thing with snow where it all of a sudden, everything just seems quiet and still. And then I love it when the snow sticks to the trees.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful on those walks. Man, you're making me want snow now.
It is March.
I know. Well, yeah, get ready. Let's talk about this. I want to make sure this is right because you never know if you can trust the internet. Your life verse, Ephesians 3:20 and 21, is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome, man. Because mine is 3:20. Maybe I need to expand it. I always will tell people, that God is able to do infinitely more than you can ever ask or imagine, and that's because of His power working through us. So, talk about what that means for you in your life.
Absolutely. I think there's so many different examples to choose from, honestly. But if there's one thing that I've discovered in my life, it's that I had one thing in mind, and what I got was vastly different. It was far more. And so it has become this moment or this thing that I said, I live on that. I know that, if I'm walking with God's dream for my life and His vision, it's really just going to take off. There's a song that I love, a popular Christian band, but they have a song called Dream for You. And the lyrics of the song say, let go of your plan, be caught by my hand. I'll show you what I can do when I dream for you. And I heard that song probably as a high school kid, and I kind of said, all right, I want to adopt that. I mean, I can't tell you, I've written things down, all types of things. And then every now and then I'm like, okay, let me go back and look at those goals. And I'm just like, whoa, God did that and then some. And so that's just the operation that I have is if whatever dreams we have, let's give it to God. And I think He can take it to a place that's far beyond what we thought.
All right. So for young men that might be listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, that think, I would love to do what you do, Chris, what would you say to them? Where should they start?
First, I always tell folks, one, brush up on your math and physics. You're going to get some skills there. But even if that is not a strong suit for you, that is okay. I think sometimes we just need good study skills, good study habits, and you'll be able to get through. I don't think you have to be the biggest math whiz to get through the meteorology major. A lot of folks get hung up on that and they think that. But I often say if the Lord is leading you to it, there's nothing that's going to stop it. So definitely push forward through that. Don't let the obstacle stop you. One of the other things I tell folks is your support system matters. I used a weather analogy for the longest of times, but essentially when clouds are forming into thunderstorms, there are updrafts. There are things that happen to lift them up. But what we often have, there's a layer of heat, and we call it the cap. And thunderstorms have to break through the cap, or really clouds have to break through the cap to become a thunderstorm. And so one of the things I tell folks is your support system is the environment that you're in. Likewise, a cloud needs a supportive environment in order to grow into something. But the cap, that layer of heat, is the same layer of heat that we may face. Those are the folks that say you can't do it. That's the thoughts that it's too hard. That's the devil saying, oh, you're not cut out for this. You'll never measure up. That's our cap. But when we have the right environment, the right support system, the right foundational ingredients to support us, we often break through that cap and we turn into something beautiful.
Now taking a look at the Bible, picking it up in Judges 7, verse 1. So Gideon and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Harod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Morah. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home." So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. The Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home. So Gideon collected the provisions and ram's horns of the other warriors and sent them home. But he kept the 300 men with him. So sometimes God gives you a calling that makes no sense, at least not by human standards. That's exactly what happened to Gideon here in Judges 7. He starts with 32,000 warriors, facing an army that vastly outnumbers them. But God still says, you've got too many. And Gideon's got to think, what, too many? Because remember, just last week we were talking about how Gideon is talking to God about how he's the weakest person in the weakest clan, and he's being called mighty warrior. So he already had a little bit of a complex here. So God begins to shrink the army, first by fear, then by how they drink water, until Gideon is left with just 300 men. Why? Because God wasn't trying to make it possible. He was setting up a miracle. And verse 2 says it clearly. If I let all of you fight, you'll boast that you did it in your own strength. God wanted to make sure that when victory came, there'd be no doubt that it was only through him. So if you're staring down a battle with what feels like not enough, too few resources, too little strength, impossible odds, good news. That's miracle territory. Because God loves showing off and showing up when the math doesn't add up. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Russ Cook. He was a 27-year-old who had struggled with mental health, gambling, and drinking, and wanted to make a difference. So he decided to run a marathon in Africa, starting at the southern tip, and continued to run one every day until he got to the northernmost point of the continent. Facing sandstorms that required swim goggles, terrain so treacherous that it tore through his joints, and over 10,000 miles of punishing distance, he kept going. And he didn't focus on the finish line in Tunisia. Instead, he broke the impossible down into one step at a time. And on April 7th, 2024, he became the first person ever to run the length of Africa and raising over $1 million for charities supporting homeless youth. So because Russ Cook redefined human limits and turned suffering into purpose, he is officially in the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. With Easter just around the corner, you'll find a meditation and a reminder of the suffering that Jesus went through on his way to the cross. An audio version of the Stations of the Cross is coming up next week for you here on Manly with Andy.